Baş. Selamünaleyküm. Shall we start? Okay. Euzubillahimineşşeytanirracim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Elhamdülillahi Rabbil alemin. Ve salatu ve selamu ala Resulina Muhammedin ve ala alihi ve sahbihi ecma'in. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone who is joining us today, both physically and virtually. Actually, I'm the only person who is attending physically. Our speakers will present via Zoom, and I will moderate the panel. For those of you who don't know me, I'm assistant professor in Ibn Khaldun University in Islamic Studies and especially Islamic law. I teach Islamic law and also Usul al-Fiqh and Islamic bioethics, which we call it also biofiqh, with Recep hocamız call it actually. So, inshallah, thank you for us for joining for last session before the closing remarks. And the title of our panel is Social Science from a Multiplex Perspective, Issues, Values, and Ethical Life. We have a distinguished panel and speaker. I'm so excited for the panel. So without further ado, just a few words about the formats of this panel. We have 4 speakers who will be speaking around 20 minutes each. And at the end of the 4 speakers, we will have Q&A section as usual. So I would like to move on the first speaker, Rosabel Ansari. So Rosabel Ansari, our first speaker, her title is Multiplexity in Islamic Metaphysics. But before her speech, I would like to give a little bit information about her bio. Rosabel Ansari is a faculty member at Stony Brook University, specializing in Islamic philosophy. She received her PhD from Georgetown University in 2020. Her research involves the transmission of ancient Greek philosophy into Arabic and Islamic metaphysics, and the intersection between philosophy and mysticism in Islamic thought. She's working on a book manuscript entitled Al-Farabi and the Ambiguity of Being, in which she studies the intersection of metaphysics and the philosophy of language. So, Dr. Rosabel, the floor is yours. Dr. Rosabel, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I'm having a few problems with the internet, so I'm just moving to a place where hopefully it'll be a bit more stable.
Okay. Okay. Okay, now we can.
Okay, hopefully I'll be good in here.
Yes.
Can you see
yes.
me and hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, assalamu alaikum, everybody. It's fantastic to you, Sister Tuba and everybody in Istanbul. I hope the connection is going to be fine, inshallah. Allah make it easy.
Dr. Rosabel? Connection. Sanki koptu gibi. We can move second speaker. Okay. Yes, can you text message to, okay, she's not here. So very quickly we are moving to second. Oh, she's there. Okay, Dr. Rozaba, can you hear us? Your voice, you are muted, yes.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, very well.
Okay, inshallah, Allah make it easy. I just pray this connection will be good for a short presentation. Okay, assalamu alaikum everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I'd like to thank the organizers of the Templeton Grant, everybody at Ibn Khaldun University, and in particular, I'd like to thank Rajab Hoja for his vision and for his support of me for many years now. The notion of multiplexity has underpinned my research throughout graduate school and continues to do so to this day. So this is a very meaningful conference for me. In today's talk, I will introduce some of my research on the theory of predication with tashkik, so al-hamal bit-tashkik, within Islamic philosophy, as well as some of my own views on this theory and how it connects to multiplicity in metaphysics. I understand metaphysical multiplexity to be the notion that being is not flat. There is not a single unitary mode of being, rather there are multiple modes, dimensions, or ways of being. So this is my starting point. Now, what is the theory of predication with tashkik, and how does it contribute to metaphysical multiplexity? Tashkik in Arabic, as I think we all know, means to create shak, or to create doubt. So I like to call it doubt-inducing. So predication with tashkik, in the technical sense, refers to the predication of a certain class of words that have neither one single meaning, nor do they have many unrelated meanings. Rather, they have multiple meanings that are related to each other. I'll explain this with some examples, and forgive me if it's very basic. I do want to recap some of the basic material to make sure that my main points will be clear. So in language, we often the single word will have a single meaning, and that it is said in the same way of all of its subjects. For example, when we predicate the term animal, we predicate it with the same meaning of all different animals. This is called synonymous predication. Then, in contrast, we have homonymous predication, which in classical philosophy means to predicate a term with different meanings of different things. So for example, to predicate the Arabic term ayn of the organ with which we see, the eye, and also of a spring of water or of concrete individuals. This is called homonymous predication because the term has different meanings that are unrelated to each other. But on one hand and homonymous on the other, there's an intermediary type of predication where a single term has multiple meanings that differ from each other, but that also share a unity, that those meanings are related to each other, although they're not exactly the same. This notion of an intermediate predication is an ancient Greek idea that goes back to Aristotle and his commentators. However, it was only in Arabic that this intermediate type of predication was called predication with tashkik, or doubt-inducing predication. So part of my research is, why is this type of predication called doubt-inducing in Arabic? Why are these terms called mushakkik? Why do they create doubt? As far as we know, the first philosopher in Arabic to use this label was Al-Farabi. In my research, I have tried to show that Al-Farabi called intermediate predication mushakkik, or doubt-inducing, because it is not clear exactly how such a term is being used. Is it being used with one meaning, or is it being used with multiple meanings? And this ambiguity in the usage of the term is what creates doubt. One of the main examples that philosophers philosophers give of a doubt-inducing term in Arabic is the term mawjood, or alternatively wujud, so being or existence. The meaning of wujud is said to be predicated with tashkik because there is a unity to its meaning, but it does not have the exact same meaning in all of its subjects. So the basic example usually given is the difference between predicating wujud of a substance and of accidents. They can both be said to be, but they belong to different categories of being. Islamic philosophers also talk about the difference between the wujud of creation and the wujud of God. Wujud in none of these cases is predicated homonymously. Rather, it is predicated with different but related meanings, and it is thus mushakkik, or doubt-inducing. So why is it significant that Farabi thought this was the case for the meaning of wujud? In his book on logical fallacies, he tells us that terms predicated with tashkik can cause us to be mistaken in our understanding of them. So I'm going to try and share a text with you. I hope my internet connection will allow me to do that. Let's see. Okay. Share. Okay. So So this is a text from Farabi's Al-Amkina al-Mughlita. And here he's talking about terms that are homonymous or mushakkik or metaphorical, or he also talks about these things called asma' manqula, transferred terms. And he says, I'll just read out the English translation, but you have the Arabic there on the screen as well. All of these homonymous, doubt-inducing, transferred, and metaphorical terms can cause a person to be mistaken in their understanding of a thing. So that instead of the intended thing, they understand the thing that shares its name. He might imagine that the two things are to be understood as one thing, even thinking there is no difference between taking that one or this one. Or the mind might not be able to settle on one received meaning, but taking anything that happens to coincide with whatever that term is used for. Okay, so I'll stop that sharing now and explain what's important about this text. So I think this is extremely significant for saying that if you take a doubt-inducing term, a term that is mushakkik, such as wujud, you might fail to understand that it has different applications. Then you might think that wujud has the exact same meaning in all of its subjects. So you might think that there's no difference between the wujud, for example, of creation or the wujud of God. Now, in another text, and I'll do some screen sharing in a second, in another text known as the Kitab al-Huruf, or the Book of Letters, this is exactly what Farabi reduces ontological monism to. So he says that the ontological monism is the result of misunderstanding that the term wujud is predicated with different meanings. So he speaks about a pre-Socratic philosopher, Parmenides of Elea, who argued that all that exists in the world is one being, and that everything we perceive of multiplicity in the world is completely illusory. And Farabi says that this is an argument based on sophistry that is based on reducing a term with many meanings to a single meaning. So I'm going to share the screen again to share this passage. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so here he says, it's a very complicated text, so I've actually just put in bold the most important bit. I'll read out the whole thing. In our saying nothing, and it is nothing, and that which has no quiddity at all, neither external to the soul or in the soul, is meant. This is the meaning Parmenides understood from other than being. And it is for this reason he said, everything other than being is nothing. For he took being, he took the term mawjud, on the basis that it is said synonymously. And he took other than being on the basis that it indicates that which has no quiddity at all, not in any way whatsoever. For this reason, he judged that it is nothing. So what is concluded from this saying is that other than being is nothing and has no quiddity at all. With this, he abolished the multiplicity of beings and made being one only. As for him, he concluded from the very beginning, so being is one. So I think you can see that at the bottom of the English. I'll just go back up to the Arabic. So this is, like I said, a hard text to understand, but the important part is the conclusion, فَالْمَوْجُودِ إِذٍ وَاحِدٍ, which I've put in bold. This is ontological monism, that there is only one mawjud in existence, there's only one thing that exists, nothing else exists. Farabi says that this argument here, that I put in bold, is the result of misunderstanding the term mawjud to be predicated with only one single meaning. Okay, so just that's kind of the important point I want us to take away from this, is that it's by misunderstanding a doubt-inducing term, right? A term that is predicated with tashkik, misunderstanding that to be synonymously predicated can lead to this argument of sophistry that nothing actually exists except one single being. This is the perspective of Farabi. Yeah, stop screen sharing. So in my research, I've looked at the many places. This is one of many places where Farabi discusses Parmenides and ontological.
Dr. Rosabel Ansari, can you hear us? Herhalde düştü hocam. Shall we wait a little bit after that? Geçin. Gelir. Okay. Dr. Rosabel Ansari, can you hear us? Or we can move on second speaker. Ay, herhalde. Değiştirmeye karar verdim.
Okay, I'm
Okay.
back.
Yes. Okay.
I'm really sorry. This is terrible internet connection. I came somewhere somebody could look after my daughter so I could present, and this was not what I expected to happen. So
No problem. Please
I'm
continue.
I'm going to finish in just a couple of minutes. So
Okay.
my last point is, why is it philosophically valuable to for us if we take being as multiplex? Why would the theory that being is predicated with tashkik be philosophically valuable? So in my view, we might see predication with tashkik as a theory concerned with the human condition in the world and our ability to both know and truthfully represent the reality of the world in language. So the theory of predication with tashkik allows us to think more about the subjectivity of human language and how possible it is to reflect what there is in the world and to understand what there is in the world. And this is by no means a theory designed to doom us to a world deprived of true meaning and knowledge. Rather, it is a theory designed as a tool to help us overcome the creation of doubt in language, arguments based on sophistry that neglect to understand the layers of meaning of a term. So predication with tashkik is thus identified and studied in the books of logic precisely because it is a tool to help us think about the way we use and understand language. At the same time, the very notion of tashkik in language on the meta level is a reflection of the limits of human language to represent the true realities of things. It thus seems to me that the phenomenon of tashkik in language is a problem that logic seeks to address. Moreover, it seems to me that predication with tashkik reflects the limits of human language, the limits of our understanding of realities of things, and if not just limits, but also an expression of the challenge in our encounter with the world and how we speak about the world. Thank you. Thank you for your patience with the technology.
Thank you so much. With our language. Thank you so much for your presentation. Inshallah, we will take the question at the end of section. So, or I would like to move on our second speaker, Dr. Omar Qureshi. His topic, adab, habitus, and relationality. So his bio, Dr. Omar Qureshi is a scholar of educational philosophy, ethics, theology, and Islamic law. His field specialties include science education, philosophy of education, metaphysics, ethics, theology, and Islamic law. He completed his bachelor degree at the University of Missouri, Columbia in microbiology in 1995, and later obtained M.Ed in science education, curriculum and instruction from the same institution. As a teacher in Saudi Arabia, he also studies different Islamic sciences with Sheikh Salman Ebu Ghudde. And he continued his Islamic studies in Damascus, Syria at Ma'had al-Tahzib wa Ta'lim, and privately with the local Damascene scholars such as Sheikh Hussein Darwish. Currently, Dr. Omar Qureshi serves as a Dean of Academics and Instruction at the Islamic Foundation School located at Villa Park. He is also a member of the faculty of Zaytuna College, Berkeley, and the Darul Makhtutat project in Istanbul. In addition to teaching, he is pursuing a PhD in philosophy of education and comparative education at Loyola University in Chicago, where he is focusing on Muslim moral educational philosophy. MashaAllah. So, Dr. Omar Qureshi, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in. Just wanted to say, can everybody hear clearly? Is the audio fine? Okay. Alhamdulillah. I wanted to start by thanking everyone here for this wonderful panel. And it's an honor to be on this panel with these distinguished scholars here. As usual, I'll be learning the most in all of these sessions. I wanted to also specifically thank Dr. Rajab Santurk for organizing this and his leadership and his vision, and for promoting such important conversations amongst Muslim scholars, which I don't think happens enough, at least from the Western world where I'm at currently. So I wish I was in Istanbul at this point, but inshallah in the future. With that, let me share a slide, the presentation that I have, and there we go. Can everybody see the slide that's being shared?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So the topic that I'll be presenting on is this concept of adab, and it's a very well-known word. Barbara Metcalf has described this as it's a word that's so widespread in Muslim civilization from its history, origins in the time of the Prophet ﷺ all the way up until now. It's in all the cultures where Muslim civilization has extended itself towards. And this, nonetheless, the concept of adab I do want to share today, this afternoon, has to do with adab as the highest good of any educational act in Islam. So the argument that I make is that adab is the highest good, no matter what type of education one is undertaking. And education in this context is viewed as a craft, as a sina'a. And if it's a sina'a, then it obviously has ghayat, or it has goods and aims and objectives that it's seeking to obtain, and fawaid. And so there are many multiple goods that our scholars identify for every science and every act of education, even if one is going to pursue the craft of medicine, or the craft of being a politician, administrative secretaries, and even of hadith scholars, scientists, and also just being a teacher as well. So what I argue here is that in all the crafts in Islamic civilization, the highest good that's sought to obtain is that the person possesses adab and carries out their craft with adab. Now here, adab has a particular context, a particular definition that I would like to share, and it was a bit difficult early on in Islamic civilization to, the concept of adab was synonymous with what's called ethics or good character. Nonetheless, the concept is very deep. Actually, it's deeper than just merely good character. Although it does include it, but there's certain epistemological and psychological dimensions to the concept of adab as well. So here, Professor Sayyid Muhammad Naqib Atas, he's a Malaysian philosopher of education. I think he's captured this epistemological and cognitive concept of adab in the following definitions, where he says that adab is the recognition and acknowledgement of the reality that knowledge and being are ordered hierarchically according to their various grades and degrees of rank, and of one's proper place in relation to that reality, and to one's physical, intellectual, and spiritual capacities and potentials. And this is a very packed definition that he takes, he takes up quite a number of pages to arrive at, and then he explains it as well. However, for the purposes of our presentation today, I wanted to focus on certain concepts of this definition. One is that this idea that adab entails a recognition. What does adab entail on the part of the person? Is that entails a recognition of what? Of the proper places of things in the created order. What this entails here is that the conception of the cosmos, the conception of the created order in Islam, is that everything in this created order, all entities, all beings in this created order, whether they're material or immaterial, whether they're conceptual, or they have, or they actually have material existence as well, they all have a particular place, and they all have a place that's proper to it. So this ability to recognize things and then also to recognize the place, the proper place in the created order is an essential component of adab. Next, we have this, in addition to recognizing, one has to also acknowledge. So it's not this proper place. What does acknowledgement entail? When we look at acknowledgement here entails the concomitant action on the part of man based on that recognition. So after one recognizes a proper place of things in the created order, then one comes to also understand that there's rights, right? From recognizing there's rights that are due to that thing in recognition of its proper place in the created order. And then those rights entail an act. One has to act based on that recognition. And the third component here is that, so there's recognition, there's acknowledgement of the reality that that knowledge and being are ordered hierarchically according to various grades. And here he brings in this idea of maratib, of ontological grades into in existence. And what we're saying here then is that adab, according to this definition, is that it is this recognition that there's a epistemological component to it, a cognitive component, which is that and that entails a recognition of the thing, of the proper place of the thing in the created order. And it's assuming that this order has a hierarchy too, right? It's assuming, because not all orders have a hierarchy. So it's assuming that this order has a hierarchy, and then the recognition of that this hierarchy is arranged according to various grades and degree of rank. And then one also recognizes and acknowledges one's own, yourself. So up until this point where we're talking about the entire cosmos and the created order, adab also entails recognizing one's own proper place in relation to that reality. Right, so now we're talking about the self in this part of the definition, and then also one's physical, intellectual, and spiritual capacities and potentials. This is quite a packed definition of adab, but for our purposes today, I wanted to focus on these three concepts of this definition: recognition, acknowledgement, and then this idea of maratib, or ontological grades. So this definition of adab addresses one, if we think about this, it addresses its cognitive and epistemological dimensions. So the focus is on that. And second, the relational dimensions. So you're looking at yourself, and you're looking at your proper place in relation to that reality. And what this is going to allow us to do is to see adab as the concept of adab, that when a human being possesses adab, it's a relational self. The conception of the self becomes relational, which is very different to modern notions of the self, where they try to, modern notions of the self, by and large, which is the assumption of many of the social scientists, assume a lack of relationality, and the self, the conception of the self, where we start from and what we try to achieve, is an unencumbered self. In other words, a self that it tries to strip itself, it tries to strip the soul away, if they even believe in a soul, but it's tried to strip the individual away from all types of relations. And these relations are considered to be just arbitrary or imposed by different power structures, and hence just mere social constructs. Now, so far, this definition of adab has to do with its epistemological dimensions. Yet when we look in the Muslim intellectual thought, we do see another dimension of adab that I think is not captured entirely by this particular definition. But building on this epistemological definition of adab, we find this notion of what's called a malaka, or a habitus, right? And that's the Latin term. In Greek, it would be called a hexis, as Aristotle notes in the Nicomachean Ethics as well. So this concept of a malaka, where do we find this? Well, in the Tajul al-Urus of Az-Zabidi, in his entry on adab, he has a very interesting entry, and he says the following. He says, وقال شيخنا ناقلا عن تقريرات شيوخه الأدب ملكة تعصم من قامت به عما يشينه. So here it's very interesting. He identifies adab as a malaka, and this is a very important technical term, and that's brought about and articulated, in the later centuries after the formative period. But if you look at, and we'll spend some time on this, but what does some of the other definitions that are provided by Az-Zabidi are as follows. He says, وَفِي الْمِصْبَاحُ وَتَعَلُّمُ رِيَاضَةِ النَّفْسِ وَمَحَاسِنِ الْأَخْلَاقِ. And so you see here, it's like this emphasis on a well-known definition of adab, which is more of a description, which is that it is the disciplining of the soul and is learning, the learning of the disciplining of the soul and the good character traits, virtuous character traits. And another definition is of Abu Zayd al-Ansari, al-adabu yaqa'u ala kulli riyadatin mahmudatin yatakharraju biha al-insanu fi fadilatin min al-fada'ili. And again, here is that it has to do with every praiseworthy spiritual exercise by which a human being can produce virtues, or a particular virtue amongst the virtues. But here, the first definition introduces this term of malaka. So what is a malaka? So the malaka in various works has been described as just, an absolute definition of a malaka is a malaka mutlaqan ibaratun an kayfiyatin. So it's a kayfiya, a quality, rasikhatan fin nafs, that is firmly established in the soul. So what we're talking about here is a spiritual quality, meaning a quality of the soul. يصدر بها عن النفس نوع من الآثار الاختيارية. And this particular quality of the soul allows for the soul to issue forth, or to have volitional qualities or volitional acts take place, bisahulatin, right, and very easily and readily, min ghayri rawiyatin, without any prior thought and contemplation. So this is the definition of a malaka. So adab here right now is being described then as a quality of the soul. And this quality of the soul, once it's a malaka, once it's a habitus, it allows for acts of adab, according to the definition provided by Professor Atas in the beginning, for the human being to carry out these acts with great ease and without any contemplation beforehand. So this is an important distinction which gives us some light into the difference between a hal, which could be a state, and a malaka, which is a habitus. That the state is when the quality of the soul, the quality of the soul is the soul possesses, but not in a very firm manner. It's not well grounded in the soul yet, but through continuous repetition of these acts, then it gets a firm grounding in the soul, and hence becomes a malaka, or a habitus. So a kayfiyat, there's 4 types of kayfiyat that are identified in our literature, qualities, and we can have a quality that are what's called kayfiyatu mahsusa, which are sensate qualities, or kayfiyatu nafsaniya, which are qualities of the soul or psychic qualities, or kayfiyatu ista'dadiyya, which are qualities that give rise to potentialities. Well, kayfiyatu mukhtasatun bil kamiyat, and we have qualities that are specific to quantities. So the malaka is the second type. It's a kayfiyat nafsaniya. It's a psychic quality. It's a quality that's describing the soul. So here we're talking about adab as something that the soul possesses, and hence the term malaka, which comes from milk, to possess. So it's something that the soul actually possesses. And allows for it to be a habitus. So this takes on a different definition, and this helps us. How do you actually come about possessing this habitus? Well, if you look in our tradition, one finds various manuals of adab, these books on adab, and they extend across all types of crafts. So you'll see adab obviously for the hadith scholar, the adab for even for adab al-muluk, for governance and for the sultan. Then there's also adab for the even for musicians, for the physician, adab al-tabib. There's numerous works that these are not works that are technical in nature, dealing with the technicalities of the craft. Their books are on adab. And hence, when we look at how does adab as a malaka, then we come to see that these adab manuals are very useful, and we come to see the real purpose of these adab manuals is to produce in the physician, to produce in the government administrator, to produce in the teacher, to produce in the student, whatever craft we're speaking about, is to produce in them the malaka of adab, and so they can carry out their craft with adab. So here, if you look, for example, in the well-known book تذكرة السامع في والمتكلم في آداب العالم والمتعلم by Badruddin ibn Jama'a, one of the great Mamluk period judges and educationists as well. So he has a book entitled A Monograph for the Auditor and the Lecturer on the Adab of the Teacher and the Student. If you look here, in chapter 1, he talks about the merits of sacred knowledge, scholars, and the honorable rank and nobility of the scholar. What he's doing in this chapter already, he's identifying the proper place of knowledge, the proper place in the created order of scholars, right? And the rank and nobility of the scholar. In chapter 2, he's speaking about the adab of the scholar. And what's interesting is the scholar has to show adab in relation to himself, fi nafsihi, right, with his students, with ma'atullabihi, and his own instruction when he's instructing, fi tadrisihi. So you actually show adab not only to external objects, but you show adab towards yourself. And chapter 3 on the adab of the student, again, you see the student has to demonstrate and have adab that he's supposed to show to himself, with his teacher, his fellow students, and his lesson. And then chapter 4, the adab, one has to, these are what I call the tools of learning, which one shows adab on books, right? And what are the adab that are associated with it? And then in the living quarters, the adab of the school living quarters, right? So how does one live and to the actual physical, bricks and mortar, buildings in which learning takes place. So there's an adab that's supposed to be demonstrated by both the teacher and the student to that. So what you get is this what we see here in this conception of adab as a habitus, that adab is always relational. You demonstrate adab once you recognize a proper place and order, for example, of the teacher in relation to the student, then you understand what is the right action, and that is the correct adab to demonstrate and to show, and what one has to inculcate in the person's soul. And so adab, to close here, this relationality of adab, once the soul possesses adab, you look at all these various things in creation, starting from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to yourself, to your students, to your lessons, to the various sciences, the maratib al-ulum, right, to the various tools of learning, the physical, material, tools of learning. And they all have a relationship, right? So what is the relationship of you to yourself, of you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to your students, to your lesson, to the tools of learning, to the sciences? And from understanding this relationship, which comes from the understanding of the proper place in the created order, and recognizing the proper place and acknowledging the proper place, then if one develops the habitus of adab, then one understands that what the correct action would be. And that action would be, if it's based on the correct recognition and acknowledgement of the proper place in the created order of that thing, and that's to be understood as how you relate to it, then that act is called adab. And once the soul repeatedly, the human being repeatedly does acts of adab, which these books, these adab manuals identify, then they can get the malaka of adab, inshallah. So with that, I will leave you and look forward to the question and answer session. Wallahu alam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you so much, Dr. Omar Qureshi.
Thank you very much, Sheikhuna Omar. Inshallah, مرة قادمة. Next time we see you in Istanbul.
Inshallah, بإذنكم.
Inshallah.
We are very sorry that you had problems traveling. We'll have other occasions to have you and host in Istanbul, inshallah.
Inshallah, looking forward to that. And we
Inshallah,
look forward to hosting all of you here in Zaytuna as well. In the
Inshallah,
future.
thank you, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you again. Personally, I really benefit from your presentation. And I will move on next speaker to use the time well. So our third speaker, Alan Godless, his title, Rehumanizing Teaching at Research in Islamic Studies. Rehumanizing, I find it's very interesting title. I'm curious about the presentation. Dr. Godless is an associate professor in the Department of Religion at the University of Georgia. His areas of research include Quranic commentary, tafsir, hadith, Islamic mysticism, also known as Sufism, and consciousness transformation, and the relationship between Islam, modernism, and postmodernism. He has conducted extensive research in manuscript libraries in Egypt, Morocco, and Turkey, and served as a steering committee member of the study of mysticism and study of Islam section of the American Academy of Religion. He's the director of the UGA Virtual Center for Interdisciplinary Studies of the Islamic World, and is the co-director of the UGA Arabic Major and the UGA Morocco My Master Program. At UGA, he teaches Islamic studies and Arabic courses, and sometimes Persian and Ottoman Turkish, as well as a survey course on the world's religion. As the supervisor of the UGA's Fulbright-funded Foreign Language Teaching Assistant, FLTA, program, he supervises FLTA, whose teach languages such as Arabic, Persian, Turkish, Urdu, Bengali, and Indonesian. Dr. Godless is a member of the UGA Center for Asian Studies and the African Studies program. So, Dr. Alan Godless, the floor is yours. Doctor, can you hear us?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. All right. First, I would like, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. I would like to thank Rajab Hoja and the Templeton Foundation for making this possible. I would like to express my regrets that I was not able to be with you in person. But to begin, my paper is titled Rehumanizing the Dehumanized Self, an Affective, Behavioral, and Cognitive ABC approach to education. Students, professors, and researchers commonly assume that they can jump right into the study of a religion as if simply knowing whatever languages believers have spoken or written is sufficient to be in order to study that religion or research it, or to study a text and research it. Nevertheless, when we do this in our relatively unconsciously dehumanized state of mind, it would be likely that our unconscious and habitual emotions, behaviors, and cognitive habits would create problems and distortions, resulting in demeaning and suboptimal relations, not only towards others, but also toward ourselves. A number of scholars have recently been writing about dehumanization and rehumanization, such as David Livingstone Smith. A few have been writing about dehumanization. These efforts, for the most part, have focused on the most gross forms of dehumanization of others, such as genocide, racism, misogyny, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism. My contention is that these gross forms of dehumanization have subtle psychological and spiritual roots. Hence, we need a pedagogy and research methodology or framework based on methodologies such as the multiplex perspective in order to root out the subtle psychological and spiritual roots of dehumanization, in order to decrease the likelihood that we and our students will engage in gross forms of dehumanization, which in worst case scenarios can result intentionally or unintentionally in demeaning and even monstrous actions toward others and ourselves. I have termed the particular methodology that I use the Rehumanization Project. Even before discussing the mechanics of any pedagogy, namely its educational philosophy and methodology, however, we must first understand the problems that such a methodology or pedagogy addresses, because without identifying such problems, students and teachers will not deem the methodology to be significant, and they will lose interest. So first, we need to identify the problems that our methodology addresses. In our case, the principal problem we are facing is the unconscious dehumanization of ourselves, which in turn inclines us to dehumanize others inadvertently and unconsciously. Specifically, I contend that it is useful to see that we have become dehumanized in three principal ways. Affectively, namely with regard to our emotions, behaviorally, and cognitively. In turn, we dehumanize others affectively, behaviorally, and cognitively. Furthermore, we are unconscious of this dehumanization of both ourselves and the other. While it is true that we have also become dehumanized spiritually, there are two problems with including spiritual dehumanization in a methodology offered both to believers and non-believers. One such problem is that in educational institutions for the public, where I teach, non-believers in the realms of the spirit cannot be asked to believe. A second and even more significant problem with adding spiritual dehumanization is that the other three forms of dehumanization are so widespread and so deeply ingrained and unconsciously habitual that many people who are attracted to overcoming spiritual dehumanization will unconsciously use their efforts to overcome spiritual dehumanization. They will unconsciously use such efforts to attempt to bypass or avoid making any changes affectively, behaviorally, and cognitively. Today, this is called spiritual bypassing. In Sufi terminology, spiritual bypassing is a dehumanizing consequence of subtle shirk or subtle polytheism, shirk khafi. Concerning this, the Prophet ﷺ said, shirk is more subtle, akhfa, than the crawling of an ant on a bench in a dark night. Although striving to overcome spiritual dehumanization, together with the three other methodologies for overcoming dehumanization, is very useful when practiced under the guidance of someone who is adept at overcoming spiritual dehumanization, I do not generally recommend, even among believers, at first teaching how to overcome spiritual dehumanization. The reason why I do not recommend teaching how to overcome spiritual dehumanization, which is spiritual bypassing, at least at first, is because until students have made clear progress in transforming their habits of affective, behavioral, and cognitive dehumanization, it is very easy for people to fall into the traps of subtle shirk and spiritual bypassing. Keep in mind, spiritual bypassing is not bypassing the spiritual. Spiritual bypassing is using spirituality to avoid changing and transforming affective, behavioral, and cognitive dehumanization. So let us return to the three principal forms of dehumanization that I focus on. I've indicated that one aspect of dehumanization is affective dehumanization. What does this mean? Affective means that which is related to feelings and emotions. In understanding affective dehumanization, I use what is termed the abilities model of emotional intelligence developed by Salovey and Mayer in the early 1980s, which was popularized by Daniel Goleman in his best-selling book, Emotional Intelligence: Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. Now, Peter Salovey is the president of Yale University. The four dimensions of this model are as follows. First, the ability to be aware of one's own and others' emotions. Second, the ability to use emotions to facilitate one's thinking. Third, the ability to understand emotions. And fourth, the ability to transform emotions. My contention is that global affective dehumanization has resulted in a global diminishing of our own emotional intelligence. One consequence of this is that parents and teachers unconsciously perpetuate this and hence diminish the emotional intelligence of their children and students in each of the four dimensions of emotional intelligence. At the root of our inability to use emotions to facilitate thinking, our inability to understand emotions, and our inability to transform our own and others' emotions, at the root of these is our inability to face and feel our own emotions, especially when we are stressed. In particular, this inability to face and feel our emotions commonly takes the form of extreme polarities of either compulsive avoidance of uncomfortable emotions or compulsive emotional outbursts or catharsis of them, commonly called emotional dumping. Recognizing this dehumanized affective state, the Rehumanization Project focuses on training students and researchers to become aware of one's emotions without necessarily avoiding or necessarily expressing them. This affective awareness is the foundation for the rehumanization of the other three dimensions of our emotional abilities, especially transforming emotions. After one is able to face and feel one's emotions, one can use unconditional gratitude to transform them. While this is commonly an aspect of spiritual rehumanization, one can utilize unconditional gratitude in this way, even if one is a non-believer. As a consequence, one can be freed from the habits of compulsively avoiding emotions or habitually expressing them, which decreases one's own affective dehumanization, as well as lessens the likelihood that one will effectively dehumanize others. The second aspect of our dehumanization is behavioral dehumanization, which has resulted, especially when our own ideas, beliefs, or values conflict with others or some text, or when we feel uncomfortable in such a conflict. This behavioral dehumanization results in habitually and uncontrollably, overtly reacting toward ourselves or others when it is not in our own or others' best interest. In addition, it results, on the other extreme, it may result in our habitually and involuntarily being passive or withdrawing when it is in our own or others' best interest to be engaged in some way with our situation. In a worst case scenario, this can result in a student who drops out of a class or leaves a dissertation unfinished, or astaghfirullah, it can result in one physically self-harming or even committing suicide. A recent headline is that American Muslims are twice as likely to commit suicide as other religious groups. The other extreme of behavioral dehumanization is that one will compulsively be critical, aggressive, or even violent toward others. Sadly, what is termed critical thinking, often in post-colonial studies, trains students to be compulsively critical and aggressive to whatever seems like a microaggression or abuse of power. In contrast, in the Rehumanization Project, when students are studying any other, they are trained via writing assignments to face and engage the other without withdrawing compulsively on the one hand, and without compulsively critiquing or aggressing upon the other on the other hand. Fortunately, such behavioral rehumanization, when coupled with affective rehumanization and cognitive rehumanization, gives students greater emotional and cognitive space, which decreases the likelihood that they will be driven to withdraw compulsively from engagement with the other. As well, in addition, such behavioral rehumanization also decreases the likelihood that they will compulsively need to critique whatever ideas, beliefs, values, or actions are not aligned with their own. The third and final principal aspect of our own dehumanization is cognitive dehumanization. This has resulted in our lack of awareness or lack of understanding of what we have lost affectively and behaviorally, as well as our inability to discern the degree to which our unconscious biases distort and influence our understanding of ourselves and others. Among the most significant consequences of this cognitive dehumanization are harmful decision-making, the commonly maladaptive influence of one's self's conditioning and instincts, and our unconscious biases. The crux of the cognitive method is hermeneutical. Basically, this involves what I call religiological analysis of both oneself and the other. This is what makes it hermeneutical in the way that Gadameryan hermeneutics addresses and involves both oneself and the other. The key aspects to the cognitive method is, first of all, asking of both ourselves and others questions in the realm of epistemology. These involve beliefs concerning the basis of knowledge. What do particular people believe they should rely on in order to gain valid knowledge, as well as what they should rely on to interpret valid knowledge. Second, this involves ontology, namely explorations concerning beliefs concerning the nature of ultimate reality. What does someone believe is truly real? What are the major characteristics of ultimate reality? What is more real? What is less real? How is what is more real related to what is less real? With subcategories of theology, cosmology, and eschatology. The third dimension of the cognitive approach is training students to ask anthropological questions in the sense of philosophical anthropology. Namely, what does a text express, or what does a group express? Are their beliefs concerning the characteristics of human nature and the identities of believers in particular, or as understood in the light of reality? In other words, who are we as human beings? What does one believe are significant classes and identities? Who are believers and unbelievers? The fourth principal the principal dimension of this cognitive method of rehumanization are psychological questions. In other words, what does some group or some text or some author express is the nature of human psychology. What does our consciousness consist of? What are our faculties of consciousness? What are our major states and contents of consciousness? The fifth area of inquiry in this cognitive method of rehumanization is teleology. This involves questions of beliefs concerning the purpose or purposes of existence. What are the purposes of human life? What are the ultimate goals of one's individual life, even if one does not believe there are overriding purposes? And finally, the last area of inquiry in this method of cognitive rehumanization that I call religiological method used hermeneutically. This last area of inquiry is methodology. What are the beliefs concerning the way of life that leads to the attainment of the purpose of life? Beliefs expressed by a group, an author, or a text. What are some aspects? What are some of the major aspects of this method that is believed to be the most appropriate way to attain the purpose of life? Okay. Ultimately, this method, the combination of the affective, behavioral, and cognitive rehumanization leads us out of the problem of relativism without having to sacrifice, without having to assert that one's own particular truth is correct. The reason is that this leads one towards truth by decreasing the obstacles to objectivity. In other words, it increases relative objectivity because the principal obstacles to objectivity are unconscious biases, are compulsive affective avoidances or aggressions and compulsive behavioral avoidances and aggressions. So by decreasing the obstacles to objective truth, one can increase gradually. Students and researchers move toward relative objectivity. So in conclusion, the combination of the affective approach to rehumanization combined with the behavioral and cognitive approach is a coherent, systematic, and relatively objective method that has the potential for diminishing unnecessary intercultural aggressions, as well as for diminishing the habit of unconsciously withdrawing in certain cases from engagement. So I hope that you will have concluded that this is a useful method for enhancing our relative objectivity and rehumanization. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. All speakers use time very well. So now we will move on next speaker and also last one, Muhammed Volkan Yildiram Stadolski. His bio, Dr. Muhammed Volkan Yildiram Stadolski had the blessing to study with ulema in Turkey, Syria, and United States. He benefited especially from the teaching of Mehmet Savaş Hoca. I'm also one of his students. Ahmet Akın Cigman and Abdurrahman Ercan Elbinsoy, Seyit Ahmet Gezer, Dr. Nurettin Atır, and Dr. Issam Eido, and also Dr. Samir El-Nas and Muhammed Emin El-Kholwadia. He received his undergraduate education at Battles College, graduating summa cum laude with honors in history. He holds an MPhil degree from Oxford in classical and medieval Islamic history, and also an MA and PhD from University of Chicago in Near Eastern languages and civilizations, where his dissertation was accepted with honors. He has been awarded Javits and Fulbright fellowships. His research interests include Islamic law, theology, and Sufism. He teaches at Darul Qasim in the US and also Ibn Khaldun University in Islamic Studies in Turkey. His published works in Islamic bioethics include physician-juristic role, and also an Islamic causes and means of healing, an Islamic ontological perspective, and also abortion in Hanafi law, and the last one, framework for cooperation between Muslim jurists and physicians and its application to determination of death with Kholwadia. Dr. Muhammed Volkan Yildiram, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Estaizu billahi semil alimi mineşşeytanirracim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Elhamdülillahi ve selamun ala ibadihillezine istafa. Allahümme salli ala abdike ve rasulike ennebiyyil ummi Muhammedin Mustafa. Khatemen nebiyyin ve imamil murselin ve ala alihi ve ashabi ve etba'i mecmain ve ba'd. I would like to begin by thanking Professor Recep Şentürk, Danish Naim, Ibn Khaldun University and Templeton Foundation for this workshop. I would also like to express my gratitude to all physicians and healthcare personnel who dedicate their lives to the principles of doing no harm and doing good and helping others. The title of my paper is A Repudiation of Physicians Killing Their Patients, the Darkness of the Enlightenment and the Inviolability of Human Life in the Light of Revelation. According to the Noble Quran, the most generous gift Allah, who is flawless and exalted, gives is divine knowledge. The Noble Quran says, recite, and your master is the most generous, the one who taught by the pen, taught the human being that which he did not know. Witness how being most generous is coupled with the teaching of divine knowledge. The Noble Quran shows in the narration of Adam's creation that what made Adam, may peace be upon him, even superior to the heavenly angels, was the divine knowledge Allah gave him. What is apparent in these revelations is that the knowledge Allah directly teaches is not ordinary knowledge that one obtains through the voluntary usage of one's senses or deductive or inductive reasoning. Since Allah, the Exalted, attributes the action directly to himself. This is also evident from the fact that the angels, who also have sensory knowledge and reasoning, this is also evident from the fact that the angels also have sensory knowledge and reasoning. So ordinary knowledge cannot be what makes Adam, may peace be upon him, superior to the angels. Rather, the special knowledge that ennobles the human being is the divine knowledge that Allah, the Exalted, directly teaches to his chosen, the Prophet and the Wali. The divine knowledge given to a prophet, unlike that which is given to a Wali, establishes taklif, moral responsibility, such that believing and acting upon it please Allah and are means for salvation in the eternal hereafter, whereas disbelief and disobedience displease him and are means for eschatological perdition. The final revelation, which the whole humankind has the moral responsibility to follow, is the Noble Quran, given to the last prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. May blessings and peace be upon him. The Noble Quran declares, say, O people, I am the messenger of Allah to all of you, the one to whom belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth. There is no God but He. He gives life and causes death. So believe in Him and His messenger, the unlettered prophet, who believes in Allah and His words, and follow Him so that you may be guided. We must appreciate that divine knowledge is the greatest gift Allah gives to the humankind. Seeing the cosmos with the light of divine knowledge enables us to understand things correctly and make correct judgments, whereas disregarding divine knowledge often makes one blind to reality and truth and causes one to make wrong judgments. In the Noble Quran, the Surah Furqan, which means the criterion that separates the right from the wrong, comes immediately after the Surah of Nur, which means divine light. This sequence indicates that through the light of divine knowledge, humanity can separate what is good and beneficial from what is evil and harmful. When humanity turns its back to divine knowledge, it loses its moral compass, so it can no longer distinguish good from evil. The Noble Quran says, who is a greater evildoer than the one who is reminded by the revelations of his master and turns away from them? Modern history testifies to the truth that rejection of revelation leads to the erosion or rejection of morality. For if there is nothing sacred, what makes one type of ethics better or worse than another? Yes, ethicists can say we can still evaluate ethical positions on whether they are based on facts and use valid arguments, but as long as these two basic criteria are met, ethical positions that advocate the killing of innocent human beings and even babies can and have gained currency and become law in secular societies. But how do we get to this point? In the period known as the Enlightenment, following the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries, there was increasing confidence in science and reason, coupled with great disenchantment with the contradictions and persecutions of the Christian Church. Indeed, the Christian Church was founded on the obvious contradiction of believing that a human prophet born from a human mother is the eternal God, and used violence throughout history to preserve its doctrines. As a political institution, the Church was also in alliance with monarchies whose absolute power was being increasingly challenged. Based on the limited but rapidly increasing scientific knowledge of the time that accurately predicted some physical occurrences, scientists and other intellectuals thought that the physical patterns they observed and were able to predict were immutable laws to which there could be no exception. Since the authenticity of revelation is proven by extraordinary miracles performed by prophets, belief in this paradigm of immutable scientific laws occasioned many intellectuals to deny revelation altogether. Yet this paradigm of immutable scientific laws and the consequent rejection of revelation were based upon incomplete induction and faulty generalization. There is no logical impossibility for the occurrence of miracles. Today, through quantum physics and other scientific developments, we know that so-called scientific laws are probable patterns. But at the time, the inner contradictions of the Christian church, the alliance of Christian churches with absolute monarchies, and belief in immutable scientific laws were important factors for intellectuals to reject revelation. Jean Méliès, a Catholic priest who turned atheist, claimed, "The last king should be strangled with the entrails of the last priest," a sentiment that was restated by Diderot, the editor of the renowned work of the Enlightenment Encyclopedia. This was not an empty slogan, but a political agenda that was actually put into action. After the Paris Commune took charge in the French Revolution, the last king of France, Louis XVI, was executed, along with hundreds of Catholic priests during the September Massacre and the Reign of Terror, by the end of which more than 16,000 people were killed. Secularists were united in their rejection of revelation and dedication to scientific method. However, they were not able to unite on a common ethics or form of government. While some intellectuals advocated egalitarian and humanitarian values within the framework of democratic governments, others found solace in a rapidly changing world in the familiarity of their own ethnic groups and fought for their supremacy, while still others were moved by a vision of a revolution that would create a classless utopia in which the rich could no longer exploit the poor. This combination of moral and political disunity, coupled with rapidly increasing scientific abilities that allowed the development of industrial warfare and weapons of mass destruction, brought about the two world wars and the Cold War. In the First World War, nation-states in Europe and the Communist Revolution in Russia replaced former multinational empires that had kept millions of people together based on the religious values of revealed scriptures. In the Second World War, liberal democracies and communists on the one hand, and racist fascist states on the other, fought for global supremacy. This was followed by the Cold War between capitalism and communism. In the two world wars and the communist revolutions that followed the Enlightenment, more innocent human beings in tens of millions have been killed than in any era of recorded human history. While during the Cold War, many feared that humankind was on the verge of extinction altogether due to the possibility of global nuclear warfare. Unchecked and short-sighted greed, coupled with industrialization, has resulted in environmental pollution at an unprecedented level, which many scientists believe is responsible for global warming that threatens the lives of millions. Science allows us to quantify, predict, and manipulate the movements of substances. Yet it does not determine any moral values that can ennoble humanity and guide us to live in peace and harmony. After two world wars, the Cold War, the deaths of tens of millions of people, and global warming, the great optimism of the Enlightenment has for the most part left this place to disillusioned, shallow, and short-sighted ideologies of hedonism, nihilism, racism, and might makes right. How were these developments reflected in the practice of medicine? Ever since antiquity, physicians aimed to do no harm and to only treat their patients in ways that were beneficial to them. The Hippocratic Oath reads, "I will benefit my patients according to my greatest ability and judgment, and I will do no harm or injustice to them. Neither will I administer a poison to anybody when asked to do so, nor will I suggest such a course. Into whatsoever houses I enter, I will enter to help the sick, and I will abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm, especially from abusing the bodies of man or woman, slave or free." But despite the enduring commitment of physicians throughout history to non-maleficence, doing no harm, and beneficence, doing good, a growing number of post-Enlightenment physicians have engaged in practices that deliberately harm and kill their patients, following the popular ethical values of their societies or the lack thereof. One of the most famous philosophers of the post-Enlightenment period is the existential philosopher Nietzsche. Nietzsche believed that since Enlightenment destroyed belief in God, no moral value remained sacred. Instead, the Übermensch, the superhuman, who was unbound by any conventional morality, should create his own authentic values. Nietzsche wrote, "Must we ourselves not become gods?" The Nazi Party followed this philosophy, and in fact, Heidegger, one of the most prominent existential philosophers, was among its members. The involvement of German physicians in the genocide against the Jews is well known. However, German physicians first began their project of purifying their nation with the coercive sterilization and killing of Germans in a program they called euthanasia, which in Greek means good death. The killing began with the mercy killing of a German boy who was born blind and missing some of his arm and the leg on the request of his family. Initially, only newborns were killed, but later the age kept increasing to also include impaired adults. The centers in which these Germans were killed subsequently were used to kill prisoners of the extermination camps. Such government projects in which physicians deliberately participated to harm and cause the death of innocent people have not been limited to fascist states. A similar government-sponsored medical project was the Tuskegee syphilis study carried out by the United States Public Health Service and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Poor African Americans were lured with the promise of free medical care, food, and burial. Those who had syphilis were not informed, and none of them were given penicillin even after it became the most widely used treatment. Of the approximately 400 subjects, 100 died from syphilis. This was the longest non-therapeutic medical experiment in human history, lasting from 1932 to 1972. The experiment is seen as one of the reasons why some African Americans currently do not want to have COVID vaccinations. Despite the end of the Nazi regime and its dark and destructive legacy, some physicians continue to carry out the murder of innocent human beings under the same euphemisms of euthanasia and mercy killing. Since 2002, physician-assisted suicide, in which physicians intentionally prescribe medicine that will kill their patients, as well as euthanasia, are legal in the Netherlands. In 2019, according to the cases reported to the Regional Euthanasia Review Committee, 6,361 people were killed, which is 4.2% of people who died in the Netherlands in that year. Of these, 162 were suffering from dementia, while 68 had psychiatric disorders. The Netherlands allows both active voluntary euthanasia, in which the physician kills the patient with direct consent, and active non-voluntary euthanasia, in which the killing takes place without explicit consent. The Netherlands also became the first state to decriminalize euthanasia for children. Physicians are protected from prosecution by the Groningen Protocol created by Dr. Verhagen, a pediatrician, who admitted to killing 5 children through euthanasia before the protocol was even formalized. In 2005, the Dutch Society for Pediatrics declared the protocol to be mandatory. In 2002, Belgium also legalized euthanasia. In 2014, Belgium amended the Euthanasia Act so that any minor, regardless of age, may request euthanasia if they fulfill certain criteria. This is in contrast with the Dutch case, in which parents may request euthanasia for infants without their consent. In the US, euthanasia is not permitted, but an increasing number of states permit physician-assisted suicide, in which a physician prescribes a drug that kills the patient without directly administering it. In 1994, Oregon approved the Death with Dignity Act, becoming the first state of the United States to approve physician-assisted suicide. Despite the fact that in 2001, Attorney General John Ashcroft authorized Drug Enforcement Agency to act against physicians who engaged in the practice. In 2006, the Supreme Court determined that the Justice Department had no such authority. In 2008, Washington and Montana. In 2013, Vermont. In 2015, California. In 2016, Colorado and Washington, D.C. And in 2017, Hawaii legalized physician-assisted suicide. As of 2019, Washington, D.C., Hawaii, and Montana do not issue reports, and Montana does not have a framework for reporting because the practice became legal there through a court decision rather than legislation. The remaining 5 states have reported that between 1998 and 2017, physicians prescribed 4,249 prescriptions for physician-assisted suicide. 66.3% of the patients committed suicide with these prescriptions. The increase in the usage of physician-assisted suicide in the US mirrors majority approval for the practice among both physicians and the public. In a 2014 survey of 17,000 US physicians, 54% approved of the practice, with 31% disapproving, while 15% selected the option of it depends. According to a Gallup poll in 2018, 72% of responding adults in the US said that physicians should be allowed by law to end the patient's life by some painless means if the patient and his or her family request it. These statistics show that the majority of US physicians and the public do not believe in the absolute inviolability of human life. As for the arguments the proponents of euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide present, they maintain that self-determination should allow a person to decide his destiny, that killing a sick person is not different than allowing him to die by stopping treatment, and that it is acceptable to kill someone who is suffering by appealing to the principle of beneficence. Opponents respond by saying that self-determination of the individual concerns the patient, not the physician who is asked to kill him. That when one stops medical treatment, it is not the physician that kills the patient, but rather the sickness he is unable to treat, which has nothing to do with the physician intention in killing his patient. And that physicians are neither trained nor have the moral prerogative to judge what kind of life is worth living. In addition, there's a fundamental flaw in the appeal to compassion to justify killing people to stop their suffering. The late Professor John Eres, a philosopher who was a member of a Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues, points out significantly the New York State Task Force on Life and Law found that the vast majority of patients who request physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia can be treated successfully both for their depression and their pain, and that when they receive adequate psychiatric and palliative care, their requests to die usually are withdrawn. This means for the mass majority of patients seeking death, their pain and hopelessness can be treated so that they no longer seek death and want to live. So how is it merciful to kill them? Divine revelation increases the scope of our understanding and puts things in perspective. It tells us that the life of this world is ephemeral and the hereafter is eternal, and that any suffering we face is a transitory test, that patients must be patient, and those who care for them should seek to comfort rather than kill them. For every issue discussed here, there is a revelation whose light dispels the darkness of the moral ignorance of the Enlightenment. As regards seeking suicide, Allah the Exalted says, "Do not kill yourselves. Truly, Allah was merciful to you." As regards physician-assisted suicide, Allah the Exalted says, "Help each other on being good and God-fearing, and do not help each other on sinning and enmity, and fear Allah. Indeed, Allah's punishment is severe." As for euthanasia, first, we must call a spade a spade. A physician intentionally killing his patient is not a good death, nor is it a mercy killing. It is intentional murder. Allah the Exalted says concerning murder, "We commanded the Israelites that whosoever kills a soul, not for a soul slain or corruption on earth, is as if he has killed the whole of humanity, and whosoever saves it, as if he has saved the whole of humanity." As for killing children, Allah the Exalted says, "Do not kill your children. Truly killing them is a tremendous error." Remember that the Prophet was sent to a society in which infanticide was rampant. Allah the Exalted says concerning the Judgment Day, "When the sun is surrounded and the stars fall, and when the mountains are moved, and when pregnant camels are neglected, and when wild beasts are resurrected, and when the seas are set on fire, and when the souls are coupled, and when the girl's child who was buried alive will be asked for which sin she was killed, Allah the Exalted has said the truth."
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed Volkan. So now floor is open for questions. Any questions? Okay, please, Doctor.
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Mohammed. What have the fuqaha said regarding the artificial support of life, medical artificial support of life?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, so what Foucault have said about this issue is that neither the physician nor the patient nor the family has the moral obligation to continue treatment if treatment is not being beneficial. Meaning, if the physician, to the best of his judgment, thinks that the physician is not being, the treatment is not being beneficial and is not producing any results, there is no obligation upon him or his family or the patient to continue treatment. So, and that's where, you know, this argument from the supporters of euthanasia come. They argue that, you know, stopping the treatment, which, you know, they call passive euthanasia, is no different than active euthanasia, in which the physician deliberately kills the patient. So we don't agree with that, and according to fuqaha, the two issues have completely different rulings. You know, if the physician thinks that the treatment is not effective, he can stop treatment, and then if the patient dies from the sickness or natural causes, then that happens. But you know, this is not equivalent to the physician deliberately killing the patient.
Okay, more questions? Okay.
My question is to Dr. Rosabel Ansari. The literature that you look at, is the idea of tashkik or mushakkik is more of ontological or epistemological? What I mean is that, so is it about the thing itself? So it doesn't have one mode of existence, and therefore it is mushakkik. It doesn't have essence, it's changing, it's not stable. Or is it more about human incapability of understanding it? I know sometimes it's very difficult to separate them, but I just wanted to hear what your thoughts are on that. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. That's a very incisive question. It's about epistemology. It's not to do with essences being unstable. In fact, for this, you know, tradition of falsafa, that's the opposite. Actually, it's not about the ontology of a thing. It's about the ability of human language to speak about things. Now, not all words are mushakkik. So when you speak about the essences of things, actually, we use words synonymously, right? So when you talk about the genus or the of an animal, that is supposed to be a synonymous predication. Tashkik predication is a very specific set of terms that are trans-categorical. The basic things like being, oneness. There's a list of words that are words that can refer to all things, right? So not actually about any particular essence. And being, wujud, is one of the main examples. So it's about the inability of language to adequately represent the modes of being. Hope that was helpful.
Thank you. So, yes, please go ahead.
My question was actually more to Dr. Ellen Godless, but also relates to Dr. Omar's speech. It's basically, I mean, my takeaway from Dr. Ellen's lecture was that, or presentation was that we have a problem of kind of like unconscious dismissing and unconscious disengagement. And in order to resolve that, we have to kind of like have some mindful set of tools in order to overcome that. But in the Islamic tradition, there's this idea, like a set of tools in which, for example, under the concept of tazkiyah, like being humble, being understanding, and that kind of facilitates not approaching your students or your teachers or the people around you or even yourself judgmentally. It facilitates basically this consciousness, this mindfulness. So can we, for example, I mean, the tradition that, or the way that I personally have been seeing around is that people are emphasizing this concept of tazkiyah, like always repeating that you should be humble, you should be non-judgmental, you should do tazkiyah, and that's it. Like re-emphasizing adab, basically re-emphasizing the concepts of tazkiyah, instead of like creating a new set of tool or a new set of paradigm. As I mean, you, Dr. Ellen, created a new set of paradigm or a new set of tools. Do you think that re-emphasizing the concepts of tazkiyah that are already there is insufficient, or like what do you think about these two, like the already existing concept of tazkiyah in the literature and the new set of tools that you talked about? That didn't make sense.
Yes, great question. Thank you so much. So there is definitely a nexus, a point of conjunction between traditional notions of tazkiyah and what I'm talking about. You can look at my approach as trying to bring to a secular, to a secular reality, a secular educational setting in which there are both believers and non-believers, trying to express a form, a way to get to tazkiyah that can be embraced by both believers and non-believers. Specifically, it does, however, point out that to the degree that one simply repeats, I should be humble, to the degree that one simply exercises one's will and tries to be mu'addab, that will be, in the end, if that is not accompanied by emotional, affective rehumanization, you may have seen what happens. There will be a reaction. And often someone who has tried very hard to be humble, if they have not approached their feelings in an emotionally aware and transformative way, there will be a rebound effect. And all of a sudden, a humble person will blurt out something and be disrespectful or compulsively aggressive. So now how is that dealt with in our tradition, in the Islamic tradition? Ultimately, tasawwuf brings to bear the idea that through will alone, through effort to embody noble qualities such as the sunnah, such as the adab, by will alone, this will fall short. Why? Because inna nafs la amaratun bisu. The nafs, the ego self, is compulsively, intensely commanding us to evil. One form of which is that the nafs will even take these noble qualities and embrace them with an attitude of subtle shirk. So this is why the Ahl Tasawwuf, what they had was they understood the process of fana, that it is essential to combine the effort of will to follow the sunnah, to embody the adab and the akhlaq of Rasulullah and the awliya Allah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, wa karramallahu wajhahu wa qaddasallahu sirrahum. It's essential to accompany this effort of tazkiyah with this attitude that was embodied in the khabar of mutu qablan tamutu, or tubu qablan tamutu. So and what is, from a secular perspective, this approach which a secular person can embrace, of enhancing emotional intelligence, facing these uncomfortable feelings and responding with them with shukr, with unconditional gratitude. This is what enables, in an Islamic sense, it's what enables the nafs of the Muslim it's what enables the Muslim to pass away from the compulsivity of the nafs, of his or her own nafs. And at the same time, it enables the secular person to rehumanize themselves and be free of the compulsion to either withdraw or attempt to destroy or annihilate whatever is conflicting with their perspective. So hopefully you'll be able to see that there is a point of commonality, or at least we can approach a point of commonality, either from the Islamic perspective, as you were indicating, to increase one's tazkiyah if one combines it with this passing away, this fana from one's nafs, and baqa billah, if one combines it with this constant attempt to inwardly pass away and subsist through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then from an Islamic perspective, we move asymptotically towards al-haq al-mutlaq, just as someone who is attempting to free themselves from their compulsive lack of emotional intelligence, their compulsive behavioral dehumanization and cognitive dehumanization, can approach truth objectively by relinquishing the obstacles to truth that derive from one's egotism and dehumanization. So hopefully that makes sense to you.
Okay, thank you. So you have second question or not? Okay. If there are no more questions, I will conclude the panel. Okay, thank you so much for speakers, first speakers for their valuable contribution. And also I would like to thank organizer and also Dr. Recep Hoca. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tuba Hoca and Dr. Ömer Qureshi. Salam alaikum. Thank you very much. Rosie, thank you very much. And Dr. Godless, Muhammad Volkan, kardeşim, thank you very much. Jazakumullah khairan, hafazakumullah, ra'akumullah, waffaqakumullah. Our greetings and prayers from Istanbul. And I am sorry that you couldn't make it this time to Istanbul. And inshallah, we'll have other occasions in the future. We'll be together, inshallah, in Istanbul, the Asitane. Inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah.
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 Jazakumul khair.
Ma'asalama for next. Okay.
Okay, Alparslan Hocam. Okay, from other Hojas who we have here. Okay, just three of us. Önder Hoca. Sen yakına gel Önder Hoca. Oraya gel. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Elhamdülillahi Rabbil alemin ve salatu ve selamu ala Resulina Muhammedin ve ala alihi ve sahbihi ecma'in. Radiyallahu anna ve ankum ve an kâfetil müminin. Rabbena atina min ledunke rahmeten ve heyyi lena min emrina raşada. First of all, I would like to start by thanking to Allah Ta'ala for putting barakah in this meeting. Alhamdulillah, it was a good majlis al-ilm. And people from different parts of the world joined, either in person or virtually. And some of our colleagues could not make it here because in the UK, they don't allow people to travel to Turkey. And like they allow people to travel to countries which is worse than Turkey, but they don't allow them to come to Turkey. I don't know why. Like one or two colleagues from America, they could not get passport. It seems like American government is very dysfunctional. They cannot give even passport to their citizens. Like for 3 months, they are like trying to get passport, and there is a backlog. They cannot get it. So Alhamdulillah, we are in Turkey. You apply, next day you get your passport in your home. It's mailed to your address. Alhamdulillah. Anyway, I would like to thank all the participants, who came over in person. I know, people are very busy. They have many other demanding responsibilities. And also, I like to thank to those who participated online. And inshallah, I pray Allah Ta'ala to bring us together in person also in our upcoming meetings. So what we are doing here and why, so I would like to just draw your attention to this for tasheehun niyyah, tajdidun niyyah. All the time, one should ask himself or herself, what we are doing, why we are doing what we are doing. What we are doing is, reviving this tradition of maratibul wujud, maratibul ulum, maratibul usul, maratibul ma'ani, maratibul haqa'iq, maratibul ahkam, which I translate to English as multiplexity or multiplex approach. This is just a translation. Actually, I'm not doing anything new. Just bringing this ancient wisdom and presenting it, to the new generations in such a way that they can understand. I hope they can understand, and it seems the response we get from them shows that they really understand it and they like it. Many young students, undergrad or graduate students, they subscribe, to this idea. But we need to bring depth, to our project. So this workshop and the future meetings, inshallah ta'ala, will help us to excavate, this forgotten tradition, the tradition which we are made to forget, so that we see the options offered to us, by Western academics as the only option. So now we are offering a new option and new alternative. People can choose either one. But I believe, in a country where multiplexity was dominant for so many centuries, neglecting it, not offering it in the schools, this is completely unacceptable. Can you imagine in Germany, like they teach philosophy without teaching any German philosopher, or in the UK, they teach, literature and philosophy without teaching any English or British philosopher or thinker. This would be completely unacceptable, and the intellectuals and academics there, they wouldn't accept it. Suppose that in Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, and Princeton, they teach fiqh instead of social sciences. They teach Islamic law, Sharia, instead of modern Western law. I mean, people there, they wouldn't accept this. But unfortunately, we are very happy with the way, our education is in our countries. It is completely alien, to the soil, to the intellectual soil and heritage of our country, our lands. So what we are doing is to revive this. Our motto is rooted revival. If you want to grow bigger, you have to have roots, that go very deep. Otherwise you cannot grow. So inshallah, this is what we are doing, and I'm very happy that lots of colleagues, young people, share this vision, and they are joining in this vision. Of course, this has diversity. I mean, there isn't like a single definition of maratib al-wujud. There are many different definitions, and actually there is some expectation like this should be like a single theory. No, it is not like this. I mean, we are ummatul khilaf, yani, and we have adab al-khilaf institutionalized. So there is diverse of opinions about maratib al-wujud, maratib al-ulum, maratib al-usul. What unites us is the usul, the methodology. As long as you have a solid, proper methodology, we respect your ideas. So this is the reason why Abu Hanifa respected Imam Malik, and Imam Malik respected Abu Hanifa, despite the fact that they disagreed in many of their opinions, fatwas and ijtihads. But Abu Hanifa knew Imam Malik has usul, and Imam Malik knew Abu Hanifa has usul, so they respected each other. So this is, so what unites the ummah is the usul. So we have consensus that as long as you follow proper methodology, we respect your fatwa, your ijtihad, and also one ijtihad cannot invalidate the other ijtihad. So, but one of the things that we forgot was the importance of usul, the methodology. So inshallah, we are drawing attention to this multiplex usul, and I am grateful, to those who came over, and our young students, they are also here. And I'm very sorry that we could not invite like everyone who's interested. So we are really privileged in this room because many people wanted to come, but because of the COVID, we had to restrict the number of people to come here. And we are in Suleymaniye. We restored the building, the physical structure. Now it's time to restore the spirit of Suleymaniye. And the spirit of Suleymaniye, alhamdulillah, Professor Hammour, it was the karama of Taş Köprüzade. His answer was given to one of the students who asked this question. So this is the spirit, this is the approach, this is the paradigm. We need to revive, in addition to the physical structure. So this will lead to the revival of the hearts, because this positivism, this materialism killed many of the hearts, and reviving the hearts is the ultimate goal, inshallah ta'ala. And this will be through these kind of efforts. Inshallah, we will put together papers and publish it as an edited volume. We will be communicating with our participants. I'm sure they will develop it further, and there will be a permanent book out of this meeting from Suleymaniye. Now we have other Hojas with us, our other participants. I would like to have them comment on the meeting, and is there anything like we need to improve, or what would be the next steps, their comments, suggestions, recommendations, complaints, inshallah ta'ala. Then I would also like to hear from the students as well. So from the right side, we continue with Hammour Hoja.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Şentürk. I have learned so much from this meeting. It's, I would say, it's an inspiring conversation, and an inspiring group of participants, and a unique mix of perspectives that is very, very rare in the academic world. This is not a perspective that is usually that there's an opening for. But I have, amongst the great lessons that I have learned, is actually the lesson about Adab al-Munadara. And I think that we should immediately apply these lessons to our discussions and pursuits of and discoveries. And the ultimate goal is not to impose a doctrine on someone else, or to prove that A is right and B is wrong. This is not the ultimate goal. Yes. The ultimate goal is to create the intellectual environment, but also the behavioral proprieties that invite us to better perceive the truth, to better perceive the reality of things, and what is beneficial for us and what can be harmful for us. And I think all of the adab of these deliberations, of these exchanges between us with others, how we write, should be guided by this. It reminds me of the beautiful hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, who says, I guarantee a house at the bottom of paradise for one who leaves arguing, even though he may be right. And I guarantee a house in the middle of paradise for he who leaves falsehood and distortion of truth, even in joking. And I guarantee a house at the top of paradise for he who beautifies his character. And if we can apply this hadith, this methodology, to our deliberations, to our approach, I think benefit will come from this.
This is multiplexity.
Yes, bottom, middle, and top. So thank you so much, Professor Şentürk. It was an exhilarating meeting and a great learning experience.
Thank you very much. As Professor Hammour mentioned, this meeting really reflected open civilization. We have like a professor like Erin Ringmar, and then, Sheikh Saleh and Hüsnü Geçer, like completely traditionally educated, scholars, Muslim, non-Muslim, from different backgrounds. So a real diversity of opinions. We try to create this environment, alhamdulillah. So, Önder Hocam.
Yeah, it was eye-opening also for me. Thank you very much. One of the anthropologists was saying, proven brilliantly wrong is better than proven boringly right. Sometimes in social inquiry necessitates this kind of humbleness, I guess. And I think, as Erik Ringmar's presentation, I remember, most of the social scientific thinking or theory somehow pushes us to write the right thing all the time. And if you look at social media today, we are discussing with Rahmi and other argumentation people in Ibn Khaldun. We really like, for instance, 5 minutes rhetorical speeches that burns the other party. Think of social media that we keep sharing very nice arguments, but we never hear what the other parties say. So somehow trying to think of a way of deliberation that somehow includes both parties and to be able to observe it, actually, I think will bring us a better or a manifestation of truth and Isharul Haq, I guess. Also for everyone, not only the other party, but today we are in a very polarizing world. The propaganda works, and think of all the, how to say, discussions around vaccination, for instance. This is real delirium kind of thing going on in the world. I think it's somehow related with the way we communicate. It's very weird, actually, and the way the institutions we created for communication is very problematic, maybe. And Recep Hoca once was saying, these institutions are a manifestation, or how do you say, manifestation of ideas. And under these institutions, there were some ideas. And under this roof, the roof is somehow built upon certain ideas, and these ideas are lost. And I think the crucial thing that what the excavation thing we are doing here is to revive these ideas and to bring up institutions that really provides our needs and somehow that solves our problems, our own problems. Now, our institutional arrangements somehow do not really answer those needs. I think these kind of conversations will, and we will be able to, I think, bring and think about this multiplexity and bring together the things that cannot be bridged easily. That maybe they were breached before somehow. There's a reason and revelation. I don't know, Gaib and Shahadat, for instance, that's what you said. And these are really difficult things to imagine together, but I think there is a way. And if we continue to deliberate in a adab way, in adab, I think we will be able to find our way.
Inshallah. Thank you very much, Önder Hoca. Like he made 2 points, which is very important. Like, once I invited one traditional scholar to a symposium, and after that, we sat together and I asked him, what's your observation? He said, everybody says, listen to me, listen to me. They don't want to listen to others. I have things to say, listen to me. They don't want to hear what others have to say. So, because this scholar coming from the adab tradition, in the adab tradition, you give priority to listening to others, like Bishnaw. In the Masnavi, the first adab is like learn how to listen. That's the first rule, in adab, like how you effective listening. And actually today, if we practice effective listening, many of the social problems, in the school, in the family, in like other places will be solved. And the second issue, this institutionalization, we have like young people with big energy, they want to see the next steps, like how do we institutionalize, how we spread it to the whole world, everything. Inshallah, it will also happen, you know, as long as we work together with adab, as you mentioned. Our dear Hoja Alparslan Açıkgenç, he's been always with us, alhamdulillah, with his vast experience and vision. We greatly benefit from him. I would like to hear his comments.
Thank you very much. I think Dr. Hammour made a very good indication. We have been talking about Maratib al-Ulum, and now we pass to the Maratib al-Jannah. So I would like to make just some remarks to show the significance of what we have been doing. And I would like to start with a statement, and I see if you would agree with me or not. Never in history, humans faced more challenging issues than what we face today. Why? I mean, why do I make such a statement? For several reasons. Let me count some of them. Science in the first place, technology in the second place, and speed in the third place. Our age is the age of speed. And speed in communication, in transportation, in everyday life, which makes things a bit difficult. Why? I'll just make a few indications for that. I took some notes, so I'll try to follow that. This obviously leads to globalization. So this is another issue that makes things complicated. And another thing, of course, the daily events, especially current politics, more at the international level. So these are the things that present many problems actually today. Now, all of these became, you know, like guiding activities in our lives, but not providing conscientious principles by which we can organize our lives in accordance with the ultimate goal of creation. So this leads us to raise another question. Where is religion within the contemporary scheme? So when I raise this question, maybe some will think that, you know, I am suggesting that religion should dominate everything, you know, in life. But this is not the purpose of religion, in fact, especially in its authentic purpose. Because the true purpose of the religion is to provide guidance, not to dominate, but guidance. And therefore, because guidance leaves freedom for you to choose. And this is the spirit of religion, in fact. So today, science is supposed to illuminate our society, and especially all those factors which I tried to count in technology, in speed, you know, in everything. But that means we need to analyze this science. Is it, you know, up to those standards to illuminate, to guide our lives with respect to such factors that are actually dominating today the whole world? But science itself is withdrawn from conscientious guiding. It has no such principles really today. It is no longer as it was in the past, that civilizations had their own scientific traditions, okay? And more or less, these scientific traditions were independent from each other. This is something that I would like to emphasize over and over again. I presented this in the West. Some philosophers of science, they didn't accept this. They said, you know, this is not, they are not independent of each other because you can see they are influencing each other. But that is a different issue. Of course, they will, you know, influence each other. It doesn't mean that they are not independent. There are proofs for that, because you see, scientific mentalities in the past in civilizations was very much different. When you compare, you can see this very clearly in their characteristics, in their outlooks, and so on. Now, the problem is this, you know, today, we have a certain scientific tradition which has become global. I call this globalized scientific tradition. And this globalized scientific tradition is inherited from the Western civilization. But you see, that means the Western scientific tradition must be also studied very carefully within its whole history. When I examine it, this is, the impression I have. Number one, in the medieval times, when we look at scientific tradition in the West, you can see it has the spiritual values and it has the conscientious guiding principles of religion. So more or less, it is very much, in line with the Islamic scientific tradition. Many things are similar. There are reasons. I would like to give the reason for that because, if I repeat a statement of Fuad Sezgin, rahmatullahi alayhi, he said, this is the child of Islamic civilization. It's a very strong statement, very strong statement. I would like to say that because if you know who Fuad Sezgin is, you have to accept, without questioning, if you know him, in other words. So I arrived at this conclusion anyway, but I wouldn't put it so strongly. He put it very strongly. But you see, after the modern period, namely beginning with Descartes, Galileo, and other scientists that they call the heroes of scientific revolution in the West, it changed the direction. Now I call this a break. It was broken from its old tradition and brought into a new area, and therefore reformation took place. And as a result, of course, there was a reaction, not against the religion, but against the church. Because the church put a lot of impediments in front of these scientists, every time, interfering into their discoveries and so on. But you see, this brought something, another result, secularization. So that means, drawing away from the church, you want to be, I want to be on my own. I don't care how you interpret the religion. I can interpret in any way I want to. So this leads to secularism in religion, then secularism in life and in politics, in every aspects of life. So this grew a lot. Later on in the 20th century, after the rise of the evolutionary biology, unfortunately, another break took this time. So the second break took, from breaking away from the religion this time, not only from the church, but also from the religion. So it became the scientific understanding and mentality became, again, let me soften the term, a religious and secular approach. So it totally turned today into naturalistic, atheistic understanding. This is unfortunately the tradition that has globalized. And that is the one that is presenting us so many problems today. So then how to deal with this? We need to, introduce in order to bring into life the old understanding again. And this is probably, this can be achieved in the area of social sciences as a whole, not as only part, but as a whole. Namely, you saw all the presenters today coming from philosophy background, sociology, psychology, hopefully in future even anthropology, archaeology, all these areas, so that we can introduce this holistic understanding to creation, existence, and as a result, our understanding of sciences. So that is why I would like to emphasize that, this humble contribution that we try to make will probably find a remedy for such problems. So this is the impression I had. So inshallah, we pray for Allah to help us and achieve our goal here.
Thank you very much, Professor Alparslan Açıkgenç. Hocam, yeah, this is exactly the problem we are addressing through multiplexity, which is coupling And once again, the decoupled sources of knowledge through modernization and secularization. And it's also one of the issues John Templeton Foundation, tries to promote, bringing together religion and science, or establishing bridges, between the two and coupling them once again. We believe that multiplexity is the most effective tool, to bring together reason, senses, and wahi, and even, kashf, other spiritual sources of knowledge. Through this framework, we can bring them together in a very sensible way. And the advantage of this is that we are not doing it from scratch. We are not doing it from zero. There's a long tradition, and hundreds, thousands of scholars, great minds, philosophers, they all contributed, from Ghazali, Ibn Arabi, Sirhindi, Taşköprüzade, and Avni Konuk. So it's a living and continuing tradition, and this is not a dead tradition, it's a living and continuing tradition. And inshallah ta'ala, through multiplexity, we can once again fix, these problems in our science. And as you said, this is a good service, not only to Muslims, but to the whole world. Because we are suffering from the negative consequences of this decoupling and separation. So Tuba Hoja, she's been with us in our group from the very beginning. Mashallah, she's doing excellent work, especially in the area of biofiqh.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. Well, actually, I don't have anything to add. Maybe Sheikh Emin, Mohammed, if you want to add something.
Okay, thank you. All right, Emin Hoca. So we are trying to teach him some Turkish, so he goes back with words. But Hoca is commonly used in Urdu and Turkish. So, I mean, we are very much honored, by the presence of Sheikh Emin with us. And actually, as I have mentioned, this meeting reflected the open civilization perspective, bringing together traditionally trained ulama, and perhaps some of our participants for the first time, listen to a traditionally trained scholar, and perhaps you observe the depth in their thinking and the critical approach they have. So inshallah, we will continue bringing together, traditional scholars and modern academics together in these discussions, so that they learn from each other, and because we have the same goal. Please.
Jazakumullah khair. This has been a wonderful experience being here with all of you. MashaAllah, it's one of the highlights of my life so far. MashaAllah, the vision and the mission you have is, alhamdulillah, through Allah's fadl. Allah give you barakah and success, keep you and preserve you, and all of you here. At the same time, I think this is a wonderful initiative for, as you say, bringing people of different levels of expertise and different types of expertise to the same table to discuss solutions for the ummah. That's our niyyah, at least, inshallah. And as you know, niyyatul mu'min khayrun min amali. So there's a reward in the niyyah at least. And hopefully, bi'idhnillah, we'll get to the finishing line too. So I just wanted to say that at Darul Qasim, one of the philosophies we have is representation and representation. Okay? Representation requires that you have authentic knowledge, that you represent the knowledge of the field in the most accurate way and the most authentic way. So authenticity requires in al-umur al-sharia, you need sanad. Okay, so the dirasat al-sharia, they rely heavily on a sanad, ijazat, and so on, because that our deen is based on ittiba', is not based on ibtida'. Science is based on ibtida', which is creativity, but deen is not based on ibtida' because that would be a bid'ah. Right? So deen is based on ittiba', ittiba' al-wahy, ittiba' al-sunnah. So we have one component that is to represent the true understanding of Islam. And the true understanding of Islam is very diverse, as we have seen. Then the other side, in order to present Islamic values and ideas to other people, we have something we call representation, where you don't distort the knowledge, but you repackage it according to the audience, according to the field, according to the context where you live. So we have now two things, content and context. So this is one of our philosophies we have, and it's very similar to yours. And inshallah, there'll be a fusion, not confusion.
Inshallah.
Fusion between us and you and everybody else here, inshallah, bi'idhnillah.
Inshallah.
So make dua for barakah and tawfiq, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair.
May Allah unite us in the service of His religion and ilm and tulab al-ilm, inshallah ta'ala. And Human Hoja, we would like to hear your comments as well. We are very happy to have Human Hoja in Istanbul. You know, especially our psychology students, you know, they are blessed, you know, with his presence, because he brought like a new vision, you know, coming from America. It's very strange, you know, like he was born here, went to America, he like, you know, entered the path of this Islamic psychotherapy, Islamic psychology, and bringing it back to Istanbul. This is how Allah, you know, does things. Once I met a psychologist, Arabic psychologist, an Arab psychologist. I asked him, like, what's your specialty? He said, ilm al-nafs. I said, ay nafs? So he was like shocked, you know, what do you mean ay nafs? I said, nafs ammara, lawama, mutmainna, which one you are studying? You know, he was completely shocked, you know, because in the modern psychology, there is only single nafs, and it's fixed and given, you know. Anyway, so we'd like to hear your comments about our meeting. This is our close meetings, you know, like your critique, your advice, you know, for the future, your comments.
I don't have a lot to say. I mean, I think this was sufficient with the closing, so I don't.
Okay, thank you very much. Jazakumullah khairan. May Allah reward all of us with our intentions and actions, and use us always in what's al-awla wal-afdal indahu دائما, and may protect us from fuduliyat wa ma la ya'nina. Inshallah, may Allah, you know, make our efforts bear fruits, you know, for us, for the ummah, and for the humanity. Jazakumullah khairan, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.